Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show. I am your host, AP Strange. This is my show, and tonight's show is brought to you by the LBPR virus protection software. You can upload this onto your computer, and it should protect you from all manner of entities online, be they demons or vengeful angels or technical goblins, and we'll even get some patches in there so that it can help you with the evil eye or hexes and curses. So get the LBPR virus protection software on your computer now to save you from all the bad magics online. And today on the show, this is going to be a really fun one. We've got author Shira Chess on the show tonight. She is an associate professor of entertainment and media studies at the University of Georgia, and she has written several books, but the topic of tonight's program is going to be her most recent, which is The Unseen Internet, Conjuring the Occult in Digital Discourse. So I bought this the moment I knew it was for sale and read it pretty much in a weekend. So I really enjoyed it. So welcome to the show, Shira.
Thank you, and thanks for reading and for the kind words.
Of course, yeah. Well, it's a fascinating topic, and I guess starting off, I'll just kind of get into a little bit about what drew you to this topic, because I'm kind of led to understand that you were thinking about it more in the concept originally of like entities online, like a ghost of the machine sort of deal, but then it turned into a different thing.
I had been writing about video games for many years. That had been my primary topic of research. And during the pandemic, like a lot of people, I got just really burned out on what I was doing. And I was like, well, what else could I do? What else can I write about? And many years ago, the first book that I had written, I co-authored, was about the Slender Man. And I was like, man, I had a lot of fun writing that book. I very much would like to revisit that fun. And so I started, I kind of just started noodling around with ideas. And I was on research leave. And so that gave me a lot of mental space. And my original thought was that it was going to be a continuation of that idea. And it was originally called The Haunted Internet. And I wrote about 5,000 words, 6,000 words, and I was like, well, I've lost my argument. I don't even know what I'm talking about here. And I realized that it wasn't gelling right. And so I took a step back, and there were like a few core books that I was reading at that moment that all kind of like congealed into this new argument. And I took a month off of writing. I did a bunch of meditating. I did some writing prompts, and I did a lot of reading, and I ended up at this topic. So one of the books that really influenced me was Jeffrey Sconce's Haunted Media, which talks a lot about sort of how discourse on new forms of media often has like esoteric echoes, right? And so one of the most well-known arguments of the book is talking specifically about telegraphy and how telegraphy and spiritualism kind of happen concurrently, right? So I was thinking about that, and at the same time, I was reading Josh Gunn's Modern Occult Rhetoric, and I was thinking about some of the things that he was writing, and then reading Eric Davis, and I just started asking myself the question, well, if in these past moments, in these historical moments, if these innovative points in history where we've innovated new kinds of media were concurrent with esoteric thinking, then surely techno-paganism at the core, and like sort of the internet, and the number of techno-pagans that were in some way part of the forming of the internet, and I don't mean everyone, but there was, there was definitely an uneven mix at times, that surely that must mean something. And it doesn't necessarily mean something in terms of a causal element, but a conversational one, right? Like it was a discourse. Yeah. And I started to think about how those flows of information occurred, and what do they mean. And then at the same time, I started pulling the thread forward to the now, right? Like, well, what does that mean now? What is that, how did that play out? How when we're talking about the internet now, what is that, what were the ramifications of the specifics of techno-paganism? And so that was sort of how I got there. And it was a new topic for me. I just sort of jumped in, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, because I can imagine for a lot of people that the idea of techno-paganism, or seeing kind of occult communities online, might be a little bewildering, and wondering like kind of how we got here, and how oddly mainstream a lot of this kind of stuff is. And on the same note, kind of how fractured we are as a society, when it seems to me the initial promise of the World Wide Web was that it was going to bring us all together, right?
Sure.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, like, there was a lot of, I found myself in the last few years sitting with the optimism that we had in the early 90s, and even up through the mid 90s, about what the internet could possibly be. I'm working on the Mondo 2000 history at the same time, so I've been like very much swimming in 90s culture in a lot of ways, thinking about like what was it that we thought we were doing, and then looking at what's going on now and thinking about what that, where did we land? And the internet is not what anybody thought it was going to be, except for, of course, the folks that were into cyberpunk and saw that cyberpunk was dystopic, not maybe not Bezos, who seems to have thought it was a business plan.
Well, right. And the unfortunate reality now, though, I think a big part of it, this is just my personal thought on it, is that a lot of these tech CEO types are not technologists or engineers like the people that invented the internet. They're just venture capitalists. Sure. In a lot of ways.
Sure.
So they've read the dystopian novels, but they thought it was cool. Like they thought it was a good thing. Right.
I mean, everybody thought it was cool, right? Like, people weren't, reading Neuromancer thinking that it didn't sound cool, but also understood on some level, I think, enough people that it was not, the goal plan.
Right. Yeah, and unfortunately, the people with all the money seem to want to push us there.
Yep.
I mean, one in particular seems to come up at least a couple times throughout the book, which is Elon Musk, because you're talking about his appearances on Joe Rogan and elsewhere, talking about all of reality being a hologram, or like a holographic reality, or which is
simulation hypothesis. Yeah,
simulation. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah. Which, I think a lot of occult schools of thought think of reality as being malleable or permeable or illusory in some way. But, I think a lot of people get duped into thinking that Musk is a brainiac, and I'm not sure how that happens, but...
So one of the things that I thought was really wild as I was like researching the way that simulation hypothesis moved online, as you know, in its mimetic way, was that, you know, so obviously there are, you know, I talk about it in terms of Gnosticism, I talk about it in terms of Grant Morrison's The Invisibles, and then the Matrix, and I talk about like sort of older versions of the simulation hypothesis, but like sort of the current iteration came from a Nick Bostrom essay from 2001. I believe it was 2001. And so he wrote this philosophical essay, and I should add, I'm pretty sure I've been told that Bostrom is an accelerationist, and I think that that's important in all of this. But
Right.
but in any case, the so I mean, like, you know, it was his article, whatever. And but when you search it online, a lot of people attribute it to Elon Musk at this point. It's wild. Like, people will like talk about Elon Musk simulation theory, and I'm like, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, it kind of is now, right? Like, I think he gets to own it in his weird way.
Yeah, just like he gets to own a whole lot of other ideas that weren't his. But
Indeed.
um, but yeah, I mean, to me, the simulation hypothesis always made sense in respect to the fact that I thought the argument was, if we were living in a simulation, we'd have no way to prove it.
Sure.
Which a lot of people have taken to mean we definitely live in a simulation problem, and we don't need to prove it, right? So,
Oh, I mean, the telephone game of people teaching complex, you know, philosophical theories on TikTok is like wild and uncomfortable, right? Like, people who are at one point, I saw somebody saying, well, we know we live in a simulation when 3D graphics get so realistic that you can't tell them apart from the real thing. That's how we know. And I'm like, is it? But also, I don't think we're there exactly. But even if it was, even if we were, that's not right. Like, that's such a wild version of a telephone game of an actual academic theory, whether or not I agree with it, that got sort of twisted into new things. And I mean, you see that a lot on TikTok, even beyond sort of the esoteric stuff. I mean, sort of like this idea where somebody will take a very basic scholarly context or concept and like take it out of context, and it just becomes a completely new thing.
yeah, and I mean, of course, that's been happening for ages, but
Sure.
it is accelerated these days.
Oh yeah.
And because most advanced philosophical concepts or scientific theorems really can't be explained in like a 10-second TikTok video or whatever, you know, like.
Right.
Well, I guess I was going to say, like, you mentioned the accelerationist thing, because the whole hyperstition idea from Nick Land, it seems like Nick Land has kind of gone in that direction as well, right? So,
Sure.
yeah.
Sure. And I mean, hyperstition is another version of sort of magical theory that became very pragmatic and sort of it sits in conversation with manifestation, right? But
Right.
in this very sort of lofty, semi-academic way that Nick Land does.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
of course, you know, I mean, and of course he is very outwardly accelerationist.
Right. Right. Yeah. It kind of, it makes me wince sometimes when people are talking about occult and paranormal subjects and they reference like hyperstition, because they're basically referencing him, and I'm like, yeah, well, there's better ways to talk about that, I think.
Sure.
Yeah, but this all kind of, I guess, overlaps with your other writing when you said that you've been writing about video games forever, because this whole simulation hypothesis leads people down the path of thinking of everybody else as an NPC, which has been
Yeah.
really disturbing for me to witness online in recent years. So do you think
Well,
like your
and
video
I mean,
game writing prepared you for that kind of
oh,
subject?
for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
definitely. I, you know, simulation theory was one of the first things that I was like really grappling with as I was sort of like working through the content of this book and trying to figure out like what is it that I'm trying to say here, right? And I was looking a lot, because looking at sort of the simulation hypothesis, you can see all of its esoteric roots very clearly. It's not hidden, but also if you don't understand what to look for, it's also not obvious. But then I kept getting caught in this question, right? I was like, well, but like, what if I'm arguing this and actually it's true? And where I landed was very much like, I am neither a physicist nor a metaphysicist. So that's like above my pay grade. I'm not capable of making a sound argument as to whether or not we're living in a simulation. But I am, I have been studying games for a long time. And so if Elon Musk thinks that we're living in a simulation, then I think that the most helpful thing to do is to understand the discourse, right? To unpack what does that game look like? What are the, I mean, obviously it looks like our world, but like what's the game design, right? What are the mechanics? What is this game that we're playing theoretically, but also actually? Because the reality is that if the richest man in the world says we're living in a simulation, then in some ways we kind of are, right? Like it becomes a non-starter. We are, because he's so carefully defining the edges of our world that he gets to say that, and it is true to some extent. It's the simulation that he's designing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, it becomes irrelevant whether the theory is correct or not. It's the fact that he believes it, and you have to kind of meet him where he is to understand like
Sure.
where he's coming from or where he's going to go, right? So you had a whole chapter in the book that I dog-eared because I was going to come back to it, which is the rituals as games and the gamification of reality, because it really does kind of feel like a lot of people in power are treating reality as a game now.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that just this past week because I've been working on a piece on backrooms, and so another point of thinking that through is thinking about like the term no clip, right? This idea that so are you familiar with the backrooms?
The backrooms, yes. You might
Okay.
have to define no clip and
Okay, so
remind me I'm
no
not a video game
clip.
guy, so.
Okay, yeah. So, in the back rooms, and now I'm like panicking because I don't have the text in front of me. But the original creepypasta that Backrooms comes from, it was called the Backrooms. Also, it was the Backrooms creepypasta. It was 2019. And it was like, like all creepypastas, it was 2 paragraphs and a photo, right? Like there was not a whole lot of there. But it basically is something like, you have to be careful or you might no clip into another reality, right? And no clip is video game speak for like a disruption of barrier, right? Like an expected barrier that does not work right. So like if you're playing a game and your avatar slides through something that it's not supposed to slide through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay, I know what you
Yeah.
mean now.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what that term means, but then it gets like applied in this weird way in the back rooms and is kind of this good reminder that we're all increasingly thinking of ourselves as digital objects, right? We're so we're becoming the digital objects that we're reconciling with, and that's, messy.
It is. I mean, especially when we identify with it so strongly, right?
Mm.
And we carefully select an avatar online, which itself, I think somewhere in the book, comes from
Sure.
metaphysical or spiritual practice. The avatar
Sure.
word,
Well, certainly like the theosophy appropriation of that concept, right? Like, I mean, like, because one of the things that I found myself really uncomfortable with early on is thinking about the ways that so much of Western esotericism is based on Eastern belief systems taken out of context, right?
Right.
And so something might not necessarily be occult in that, like said, the traditional sense of the word, that of something that is unseen, or hidden, right?
Yeah.
But the but then when it gets pulled into another culture, it becomes reshrouded with this new mythology, right? So I mean, Avatar is one of those terms, right? That got like sort of, shaken baked into a different culture and then used in a different way. Another one that I think of a lot is tulpas, right? That how tulpas were not necessarily esoteric in the way that they were being treated, but then they got, sort of, Alexander David Neal brought it, to Western by, I believe, she was a theosophist. And then it got sort of like recontextualized, and now, like, the kids are all making tulpas online.
Right. Well, I think John Keel had a big hand in that as well, the ufologist, because he makes reference to David Neal in the Mothman prophecies, I believe. And then
Right.
I think that's
Right.
where a lot of people online have picked it up from is John Keel's reference to magic and mystery in Tibet.
Sure.
But yeah,
again, that's not
Theosophy is all
right. Yeah. Like,
well,
I mean,
yeah.
again, it's a telephone game, right?
It all is, but I mean, the occult is kind of that.
Sure.
Sometimes well, often it's appropriation, but in the modern age of occultism, it seems like a lot of it started right at the Victorian era, which is going to be problematic from the jump. Just that
Sure.
whole era, and I did want to get to that as well, where like kind of at the very beginning of the book, you were kind of talking about an entity, the Loab, conjuring Loab, but
It's pronounced lobe.
is it Loab?
It
Wow.
is. I asked to the Steph Maj Swanson, the person who initially generated lobe, and because I had been absolutely pronouncing it loab, and I was told that it is a homonym for lobe, for like earlobe.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Because I mean that kind of gets to the whole like Slenderman-esque
Mm.
concept. But from there, it's like it seemed like you kind of had to, for readers that might not know, give like a little background to all the esoteric occult schools of thought that are going to play into the book. And I was like, well, that's a tall order.
It
Reading through
is.
that,
It
I
was.
had to kind of commend you for that because I mean, did you have a background interest in occultism and magical practice prior, or was this all stuff you had to research just for the book?
I mean, a little of column A, a little of column B, right? Like, I knew enough to get me started, but not so much that I didn't have to do a good deal of research to get there, right?
Yeah.
And early on, there was like a lot of sort of like me trying to figure out connections between things. But it definitely, part of what I wanted to do here was I wanted I wanted to write a book that both people who were already invested in occult thinking and also people who were not were equally able to read this and get something out of it, right? I was trying to speak to multiple audiences at once, which is, I don't recommend it.
It's a tough
It's
road
not.
to hoe. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, no, totally. But yeah, so I realized early on that if I want readers that are not just people who buy occult books, that I was going to have to explain some baseline things and just sort of have like a little bit of a cheat sheet of like, okay, here are the things you need to go know to get through this book, right? Like, here's the baseline of the different traditions, and then but at the same time, I didn't want to spend so much time on that was the full book, and I certainly didn't want to bore the rest of y'all.
Right. Well, no, yeah, I think it's pretty in depth, but it's the appropriate length. Because I started from there. I read the introduction. I'm thinking, wow, she's really going for it because I find it commendable because when I'm writing about these subjects, I kind of assume people basically are coming to me knowing a bunch of stuff already. and I don't want to get bogged down with all of that. And
Sure.
I realized if I ever wrote a book, I would have to do that. And I'm dreading the idea, but throughout the book, I think you kind of the reason I asked about your background interest in it was because you do a really good job of remaining objective throughout the book, where you're just kind of laying it out and removing any biases that you might have had. So, which I really appreciate, because even when you're getting to the point you're talking about TikTok, reality shifters, and topomancy, and some ideas that people might find really, really bananas. It's like a lesser writer would be making fun of it and stuff, but you're just kind of holding it up as a sort of a modern folklore or modern magical practice, which I thought was that you kind of reserve judgment on the reality of it and set that aside, just examine the cultural impact.
Yeah, I early on I felt like it was not fair of me to make fun of people for their beliefs. I mean, like, the world is wonderful and horrible and strange, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that hegemonic beliefs are any more credible than non-hegemonic beliefs. And it didn't feel like my place to critique people, and it felt mean-spirited to do so. And so I tried to take a very invitational approach, and then I ended up sort of labeling it as the Chapel Perilous, right? That I was writing this from the position of the Chapel Perilous, which I think was a helpful way for me to also remind myself as I was writing not to get judgy. Which there are moments where that does get hard, and I think at times, even where it was the hardest, sometimes I like doubled down on it, right? I think in that reality shifter chapter, I very specifically doubled down, and I was like, look, rather than just saying I don't know, let's take them at their word, because why is it, it's helpful to, again, if we're studying discourse, then it's really helpful to take people at their word.
Right, exactly. You need to know what they're saying. And I think you quote Eric Davis as saying, it's a process of taking it, well, let's see, what was it? Now I'm scared. Now I'm going to screw it up.
It's
taking it seriously, but not literally.
Yeah, that's what it was. From High Weirdness, which really, that book was helpful in thinking about it in that way, right? Like that he was very gentle with with the people that he wrote about in that book, and but not fanish either. And that was sort of where I was trying to. I was certainly trying to emulate that in my own writing.
Yeah, it's good. And I mean, the Robert Anton Wilson kind of model of I guess, like, maybe logic is helpful in looking at these things, which is kind of how I've always tried to do it. And I know I have a lot of listeners that are Robert Anton Wilson fans, so they'll pick up on that. But
Sure.
Davis's book, I haven't actually read it. I know a lot of people have enjoyed that. That focuses more on Philip K. Dick and Wilson and the McKennas, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's sort of like 3 case studies of megatrips, right? Like of like,
Right.
And yeah, similarly sort of studying the discourse.
Yeah. Okay. Because I mean, they all come up in some way, shape, or form in the course of this book. Because I mean, far from just covering the current state of things and the types of well, high weirdness and magical thinking online, you go right back to the origins and discuss how, like, the origin of Silicon Valley was kind of seeped in a lot of that sort of hippie pagan culture there,
or like post hippie, I'd say, right? Like
yeah.
sort of the hippie residue, and that there was, when Margot Adler did a survey in the 80s, so Margot Adler, who wrote Drawing Down the Moon, she did a survey of pagans in the 80s and discovered that the vast majority of them had careers in and relating to computing. And I was like, well, that's a really interesting statistic, right? Like that actually speaks volumes, because we're also talking about the time period that's just after the Satanic Panic, right? So the internet would seem very attractive to people with alternative spiritualities. It's, there's sort of, it's both anonymous and not anonymous at the same time, right? Like there's a method of tracking one another, but not necessarily in a scary way. It's certainly not then. And it was also, the BBSs created a lot of text file dumps, right? Because of course it prioritized distinct texts that other people couldn't easily get. Well,
Right.
I mean, there are two things that fall into that category, and they're generally either porn or occult, right? So, and the
Or a little bit of
BBSs
both.
had both, right? The BBSs were not shy about either of those things. And so, Podsnet developed, it was originally MagicNet, that was, it was sort of a collection of the different BBSs that were related to esoteric themes loosely, or not loosely, I guess, depending on the BBS. But so there was this giant text file dump out there of all of these rare occult texts that suddenly were easily accessible to people who had the understandings of it. And again, it was like an easy place to kind of like meet people with similar interests at a moment where that wasn't necessarily safe in the real world. And that seems notable, right? And so, like, I like to say that early internet both occulted and de-occulted alternative spiritualities at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, it helped connect a lot of people that otherwise would have been alone with their interests. And
Absolutely.
even nowadays, there's parts of the country where bookstores are harder to come by, or it's a heavily religious area, so you're unlikely to find a new age or occult bookshop. And of course, you can order books online now, but there's so much that's just available to read and or stuff that's out there, and people you can connect with via social media, which I guess is a blessing and a curse for a lot of people.
It is. It is.
I think that what you just said and what I just said, something that comes back, there's a balance with all of this stuff. And it seems like there's a good and a bad to every aspect of this study. So treading that middle path in the Chapel Perilous is probably the best course. The PKD thing made me think of something I had written at one point, which also comes up in your book as far as the different kinds of reality go, and that's the prevalence of Mandela effects as an online phenomena these days. Do you want to get into the Mandela effects at all? Because I don't.
Oh, I'd love to talk about Mandela effects.
Strictly an internet thing, but the virality of it online has kind of gotten way out of hand at this point.
I actually do think it's an internet thing.
Okay.
Because I think that whether or not it was something that was happening before, it took people from a distance being able to communicate with one another rapidly in order for it to snowball into a phenomenon.
Right. Okay.
Right. So it took it took that initial website that was, I think I was that 2012, somewhere in there, not to cause any conspiracy theory new ones, but but it was I think it was around between like 2000 and 2012. There was a conversation that happened at a Dragon Con, and it snowballed into a thing, and it was it of course started with people arguing over whether or not at that point Nelson Mandela had died in the 80s, and because people had these vivid memories of Nelson Mandela dying in the 1980s. And and I should add, and then they started posting online, and people started posting other things, and nobody from, of course, from South Africa that I have encountered has ever been like, nope, that's true, right? Like, I mean, Mandela effect. That particular Mandela effect is very, very, very Western, but at the same time, the so like all of these other little ones, right? There, it's always, of course, like sort of brand memory. So is it Berenstein or Berenstain, right? Is it did Sinbad make a movie in the 1990s? And it's sort of like, it's very like brand centric and very culturally centric, because it has to be, because that's what we share. And I see Mandela effect as being sort of like the edge of the rabbit hole that a lot of people sort of peer into regarding the simulation hypothesis, right? Like, it's just at the edge where it's just sort of like this fun conversation that you can have. You at a cocktail party, you debate whether or not do you remember Berenstain or Berenstein? I don't know. And but then as you sort of fall into that rabbit hole and start looking at different like glitches in the matrix, and people start getting more invested in that, and that's on a more personal level, right? And and then all of a sudden that sort of like snowballs into simulation hypothesis, and the really like sort of the deep ends of the rabbit hole, which of course is like David Icke, and the sort of then it's sort of like, so a part of what I write about is talking about it in terms of Gnosticism. And so by the time you get to that deep end of the rabbit hole, it actually goes full circle and goes back to like the archons and the demiurge, and right, like, right. But there's a line there, and it's not that these things didn't exist before the internet. It's that the internet moved information around differently, and also it's representative of how we see the world differently, right? We are all experiencing dramatically different realities than one another in a way that, like, maybe we were doing that in the 20th century. We definitely were doing it to some extent in the 20th century, but certainly not to the extreme that we are now.
Right.
And so again, if you're looking at discourse rather than causality, it becomes sort of interesting to think about how our esoteric theories and our belief systems really do so nicely map onto our technological innovations.
Yeah, and the technological versions of things, the terms that arise because of technology are supplanting a lot of the old esoteric ideas that would have been thought of as just kind of psychical ideas or magical ideas before. Like, glitches in the matrix, as I understand it, includes such things as like synchronicity and deja vu, when we already had words for those things that already had their meanings before, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, fair. Yeah. But again, it goes back to that sort of like gamification of reality, right? Like, a glitch in the matrix is very much we're seeing the edges of this technological reality. I mean, there have, of course, been simulation theories for a long time, but that Nick Bostrom essay wasn't saying, are we living in a false reality? It was asking, the title of it is, are we living in a computer simulation?
Yeah, specifically computers. Yeah.
Right. We are dealing with the resonances of the fact that we ourselves are becoming more digital.
Yeah, and I've always tried to resist that, because when I first heard of people talking about computer simulation as the simulation hypothesis, I'm like, isn't that just like Plato's shadows on a wall with new skin?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
And I've noticed this creep into a lot of different paranormal subjects too, where it used to be that if you had an encounter with weirdness and like a UFO encounter, and then all of a sudden you had all these new ideas and knowledge, it would be kind of like a visionary experience or a telepathic communication. And now people just unreservedly call it a download, and that's just become the new word for it. Like, oh, I got a download, and now all of a sudden I can speak this other language. It just, I'm uncomfortable with it, but I guess that's the way we're going.
Yeah. No, it is uncomfortable though, right? Like it is. I mean, we are simultaneously at a moment where we are questioning the humanity of the non-human entities that we're dealing with, and at the same time mechanizing ourselves in how we talk about ourselves. And those two things simultaneously are frightening.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm glad to hear you say that, because sometimes I feel like I'm going nuts over here. Because
no, I'd agree. That's pretty frightening.
Well, yeah. I mean, it gets into the concept of what is called AI, and I hate to even call it that, because I don't like ascribing something like intelligence or consciousness or sentience to a model program, like a programmed piece of software, right?
Right.
But the language, the way they play around with the language, has duped a lot of people into thinking that it's the same thing as human intelligence.
Yes.
Or that human intelligence should aspire to be more mechanical. So this is this definitely a shift.
Or that it somehow has superior intelligence to us, that it is, it is, I talk about it very much in terms of, humans courting non-corporeal entities, which of course, we've always done that.
Yeah, but in esoteric terms, it might be more similar to like the story of the golem, creating
Sure.
something non-thinking that could cause a lot of damage, right? So
Sure, yeah. But a golem is still a non-corporeal entity, right? That gets, or it starts off that way. I guess eventually it's corporeal, but the sentiment is non-corporeal, right?
yeah, well, yeah, the process that gets you there, I guess, the
Yeah.
indication. Yeah. But as far as non-corporeal spirits go, I mean, you kind of get into that quite a bit in the book as well. Where I think it's toward the end, you're talking a lot about like demons.
Yeah.
And
Although my definition for demon is pretty loose. I'm pretty like I spend a non-negligible amount of time like basically saying, well, I mean, like, so John Dee and oh gosh, now it's definitely late. Who was John Dee's friend?
Edward Kelly.
Thank you. So Dee and Kelly were like conjuring all of these things, and some of them were angels and some of them were demons, and some of them lied and some of them didn't. But how would you know, right? Of course. So like they're both the same thing. Let's say that they're both the same thing just for the sake of argument. And then, if you are doing if the spiritualists conjuring ghosts, well, I mean, if a entity is not to be relied upon for honesty, then how would you know, right? Like, and of course, throw in the jinns there, and if, while you're at it, you might as well throw in fairies. And then Jacques Vallée, of course, says that aliens and fairies are the same thing. And then all of a sudden you have like this big soup of like non-corporeal entities that all essentially have similar patterns. And of course, like, obviously, to a practicing magician, those distinctions would matter. However, for the sake of argument, let's just like say that they're all non-corporeal entities, right? And like humans have been grappling with the correct way to talk to and about non-corporeal entities, for humanity, right? And thinking about what that might possibly mean. And so this is just the latest iteration of that, right? Or should we, and we can take some lessons from that, like the questions, the questions that we're asking now are questions that we've asked before. Do we yell at them, or do we act really nice and ask nice things? Do we want them to be sycophantic, or do we want to see their true nature? All of those things are necessarily baked into this broader discourse of human beings trying to talk to something that is not us.
Yeah, yeah, and hopefully, in some ways making it work for us, right? Instead of
Right.
against us. But then you kind of get into some of the discourse around the idea of whether, with demonolatry, for instance, what people debate whether it's okay to find and use demons and then banish them, or if you should just try being nice to them and asking for a favor.
Yeah, there was a big demon war on TikTok several years ago over that, where they were debating whether, do you ask nicely or do you yell at them, right? And like sort of this all the Solomonic folk were like, no, you have to yell at them. That's what we do. And the demonolators were like, no, you ask nicely and do it favors, and everything will be fine. And so like this is. But that's also not part of what we talk about when we talk about AI, right? Or certainly, and when I say AI, I don't mean actual AI, right? Like, so of course we have AI around us all the time, right? We have, our spell checks and our, all of our different things in our lives that make our lives actually better. I'm talking about artificial general intelligence. I'm talking about this thing that does not exist and yet is being treated like it does exist with chatbots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
There are people that have a vested interest in making us believe it exists or that it will within a few years. Yeah.
Yes. Sort of that we're at the edge of conjuring a world-eating demon that nobody really wants, but but everybody is working really hard to find for some reason.
Yeah. Yeah, it's got some Cthulhu vibes to it, I think.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think I have noticed this, and I've seen people, this is just anecdotal, it's not something I've studied, but I have seen people make reference to the fact that when they're talking to ChatGPT or something, they try to be polite.
Mm-hmm. Just in case. Yeah,
just in case it does take over. They don't want to be the first ones against the wall. But I have heard people say that they do it kind of without thinking, right? Like it's...
Right.
Yeah, and that's
well, because our chatbots are too human presenting, right? Like because that's what we're being sold with our chatbots. They have cute names, and they're meant to respond in semi-human ways, and that's we often use human-like pronouns for them, and that's not helpful, certainly.
Right. Yeah,
but all of those conversations we've had about other non-corporeal entities, it's the same deal.
Yeah, and all of the wonderful sci-fi that's been written over the years warning us not to do that.
Again, people who took cyberpunk as a challenge, not as a warning.
Right. They read William Gibson and said, "Hold my beer."
Yeah.
Well, I think the other half of this, though, I mean, getting back kind of to the gamification and things like reality hacking and culture jamming, is that sometimes you can use this as a way to disrupt some negative power systems, right? Like you kind of get into the history of Discordians and chaos magicians and stuff online. And a lot of those different kinds of aspects. So how about some of these like more fun and goofy presenting ones?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, so I really got into this whole notion of reality hacking. So again, I'm working on the Mondo 2000 book, and the second, I assume you know what Mondo. Should I explain what Mondo 2000 is for listeners?
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do people know what Mondo 2000? I have no idea what people know anymore.
Right. It's worth explaining. Yeah.
Fair enough. Mondo 2000 was a magazine from that ran from 1989 until 1997. And it predates Wired magazine. It actually, Mondo 2000 wasn't the first iteration of the magazine. So the first iteration, the very first one was called High Frontiers. It was a pro-hallucinogen magazine, and it was vaguely, partially, a little bit funded by Terence McKenna. And then they lasted 4 issues. They were some of the second issue is pretty epically famous. It's this giant pink thing, and then the second, they changed their name because they realized that they weren't going to ever sell ads being a like a hallucinogen friendly magazine as its central premise, and go figure. And so
during the Reagan era, no way.
Right, no, I mean, but they were going hard during the Reagan era, so hats off to them. And they in the second iteration, they renamed themselves to Reality Hackers, and it started because they all lived in, or not lived, but some of them lived there, some of them didn't. It was a mini mansion in Berkeley Hills, and they made the magazine out of there, and they lived there, they hung out there, they made the magazine there. And they were all sitting around one day, and there were some hackers in the room, and this and one person who was was a staffer at that time, Alan Lindell, goes, well, we're not hackers, we're reality hackers. And everybody's like, yeah. And so it ended up sticking, but it only stuck for 2 issues because in 1988, not enough people knew what the word hacker meant, and people thought it kept getting shelved in the true crime section because they thought literally hacking people up.
Right.
And yeah. and then in 89 they changed their name again to Mondo 2000, which is a whole story. I don't think I said this. I'm co-authoring the book with Are You Serious, who was the former editor-in-chief of the magazine, because I, like a challenge. I don't know. So it's great. If he's listening, hi Ken. But in any case, so there was this moment where they were all talking about this idea of reality hacking, and it really was sort of not. It was definitely related to chaos magic that was starting to brew, and this idea that magic didn't necessarily need to be about old school rituals and it wasn't the OTO, right? There's a great quote from Genesis Peerage that I absolutely love. Genesis Peerage in the Psychic Bible says, the magic of the temple wasn't the magic of the Golden Dawn designed for the stately Victorian manner. It was the magic designed for the blank-eyed, TV-flattened, prematurely abyss-dwelling youth of the late 20th century. And that quote really sums it up for me, right? What it was that everybody was trying to do. It was suddenly everything in culture at that moment was DIY, right? So even Reality Hackers itself was taking its cues from Whole Earth Catalog. It was it was the more esoteric version of that. And then it became Mondo 2000, and that's its own, little saga. But I don't remember where we started with this, but essentially, so it was all connected at that time. And again, there was sort of this sense that the internet was part of that, right? That the internet could be this space where the corporations didn't have to own the memes, right? Everybody in the counterculture in the late 80s and early 90s was talking about memes, not the memes that we have today, but the passing of information. And of course, Dawkins is very much an atheist. He's very, very clear on that point. But this idea of memes was very attractive to people in the counterculture, right? It was this actionable way of moving information. It was a way of thinking about information differently and information flow. And they saw the internet as being very central to that. And and to this idea of destroying monoculture, right? Like back in the 90s, everybody was talking about this idea of monoculture, that we had to ruin that, we had to destroy consensus reality. And I mean, this is what it looks like to destroy consensus reality, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I would have been on board with that at the time, and now I kind of wish
Right?
that there was a little bit more stability.
Yeah, indeed. I like bring back the monoculture, man. I don't know.
I feel like
I mean,
we're
maybe
all,
not. Maybe not. I don't know. Like I say that out loud, and I'm like, oh.
yeah, the status quo was
1984 is a
not
monoculture.
right. The status quo was not so great, but the complete and utter anarchy of perception and perspective is not necessarily great either, because you almost feel like you don't have any common ground to stand on with people.
Right.
Which in itself I think is an illusion. I think most of us have more in common than we tend to think. I mean, we all want to eat and survive and have a place to sleep at night, and
Sure.
that could be a guiding principle for all of us. Uh, but but yeah, I mean, it seems like, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And when I think about the '90s, I mean, I was pretty young in the '90s, but it felt like there was a lot of paranoia and ennui and disappointment with reality and institutions.
Yeah, but like now looking back, I don't know. I mean, I was in my late teens and then early 20s in the 90s, right? And so I mean, I look back at that culture now, and not just in terms of like nostalgia for my own, you know, stuff, but looking at the culture that we produced in the 90s was so much more real than what we have now, and I
Yeah.
think that was the thing that I started, the Mondo 2000 thing started because I started reading them for this book, right? I had started looking at them and thinking about them as I was doing research for this book. I was not a Mondo 2000 person when I was back in the 90s. I might have read an issue. I vaguely recall something, but I was so shook when I started looking at those old issues of the magazine, remembering what culture used to look like and
Yeah.
how real it used to feel.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all, it's kind of a bummer.
It kind of is, right? Like, and everyone's trying to make zines now and bring back the zines, right? And I'm all for bringing back the zines, but I think that like there was a moment where we had something that did feel different, and that there was sort of that the generation was kind of fighting back against sort of the big culture, and then the internet happened, and then it went, and now we're here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that kind of gets back to, uh, bring us back to my initial question, which was the promise of the World Wide Web when it started going into everyone's home. Is I was young, and I guess we're about the same age, but it's and like uh, my father worked for the Digital Corporation, and we had a computer at home before a lot of other people did. Um, and I was struck by the idea that this is something that we can now communicate with people overseas and all over the
Sure.
place, immediately. And it seemed like the promise of that era was that, like you said, there weren't the corporate barriers. And I guess, powers that be saw to it by this point today.
Well,
That's
and
not the case,
everyone
right?
Well, and everyone that you communicated with across seas and on the other side of the world, you knew were actual humans. I mean, they may not be the humans that they said they were, but there was a general understanding that you were talking to humans. I mean, I'm a college professor, and I had a moment when I was teaching a class full of freshmen recently where I realized that they've never known a culture. They've never known an internet, rather, where they could assume that all of the people were real.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty wild when you think about that.
Right. I mean, we knew that there probably wasn't really a prince in Nigeria that was trying to give us,
Right.
but some real person had to write that email.
Sure, sure.
But yeah, no, I
I
know
mean,
what
but that
you
was
mean.
also like the midpoint, right? Like the you know
Yeah, that was later, but
those schemes, that was like the early 2010s, like, back in, the age of BBSs and the early, in Usenet, and sort of like the early message boards. You always knew you were talking to a person. There was no question that you were talking to a person. You
right.
didn't know who that person was, but you knew that there was a human on the other side, and that was a really powerful feeling, right? To know that the world had gotten that much smaller.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like there's always these shifts with media and forms of technology where it becomes more DIY and it becomes divorced from having to appease some kind of corporate overlord. Right? But nowadays we've more or less given away to algorithms and social media as ways of getting anything that we create out there, regardless of what it is, right? Like if your
Yeah,
business isn't online, it doesn't exist as far as people are concerned.
yeah,
Um,
it's true.
yeah. Well, I don't want to be a bummer. I keep coming back to being a bummer
I'm
because I feel like the book wasn't a bummer, but uh,
glad to hear that.
no, it was a lot of very interesting stuff. Um, well, when you were talking about the memes, this is something that was interesting to me was the origin of the Skeletor meme, because I had no idea that
Yeah.
that had such a storied history.
Yeah, I didn't either. That was really cool finding that out. That was Autumn and Fox, who used to run the Discordian.com. They were the ones who told me about that. It was amazing. The it was essentially at PantheaCon. There was a lot of infighting going on, and they created it was a Skeletor affirmations ritual, and they were using Skeletor because he always just looked so sad in the images, and they were like, this is sort of using that meme and using the general idea to kind of spread outward, this positive energy to try and like lift up the community better. And and so like part of why I told that story was, and this wasn't the earliest example, but I thought it was a really sweet example because of course, then of course that Skeletor meme ended up happening outside of the Discordian, like it became a regular meme, right? It just
Right.
alongside all the other memes, right? And it makes you kind of wonder how many, where do our memes come from, and like how, what kind of intentions get put into meme images, the macros that we see, right? We don't know all of the stories, and we don't know the origins, and those origins are interesting and messy. But part of where why I told that story was that so I was looking at the Magic Meme War of 2016 that supposedly, the meme magicians online said that they used to elect Trump as president.
Right.
And most of the accounts told by them, and also a couple of academics, were attributing the dawn of meme magic to 2014, I believe, the Ebola Chan meme. And I talked to magicians who were like, no, we were using memes long before that, right? Like,
Right.
that's not, right? Like, and, one of the best ones was the DKM used linking sigil. And the linking sigil was something that was used in I think it was the early 2000s. I am not remembering offhand what the year was, but either late 90s or early 2000s. And so it was the sigil to kind of like link together different communities. It was putting in all kinds of things. That's in Unicode.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like we have all of these like memes that are out there, people using meme of the hand of Eris, right, as in like, emoticon style, right, as page dividers. All of these things out there, they have meaning, and they were people expressing different kinds of belief systems into their digital objects. And that's not to say that they worked or didn't work, but it's certainly part of the wallpaper now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing about the wallpaper is you stop noticing it after a while.
Yeah. Yeah, and then one day you look at it and say, well, why is that like, well, who chose that?
Right.
Like, where did that come
right.
from? Right. Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's kind of a something that you come back to throughout the book, in regards to kind of the objectivity of it, is that it really doesn't matter whether the magic works or the magic is real, or what people truly believe when they're doing this stuff. It's the fact that it is there. It's baked in. It's part of the internet, and it's integral to the internet's existence, right? Whether or not it's truly magical, right? So,
right.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool thing. And then while we were talking about that, it made me think of two things. Two of the bigger messaging apps used out there nowadays are like Discord and Slack, and it always kind of struck me that one of them seems to have an association with Discordians, the Discord, and Slack seems to be a reference to Subgenius,
Yeah, I hadn't thought. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that with Slack. The Discord thing I've like thought about, and I was like, man, I wish I knew.
Yeah, who knows? Because that seems like a weird way to describe an app that you use to communicate with people while you're playing video games or whatever, So.
Agreed.
And the other thing I was thinking about is, like, sometimes these things are really just jokes that the meaning gets lost. Like, everybody calls emails they don't want spam still nowadays, and it's really just because early people on the internet were Monty Python fans.
Right. No, I mean, like, all of these linguistic moments matter.
Yeah, I think so, because I mean, when you're talking about like Platonic forms or magical concepts and the power in names and things like that, then yeah, absolutely, the language we choose matters, and the language more often than not in the internet and the tech sphere is at least occult adjacent, right?
Right.
I think a lot of it is summed up by the header for your last chapter in this, which is nothing is true, everything is permitted, which of course is near and dear to me as a Discordian, but that kind of gets to some of your conclusions on this. But I think it also really does kind of sum up the world in which we live, where everybody is experiencing a kind of different reality.
The mythology, of course, is that supposedly Hassani Sabah said that on his deathbed, and then it got, Nietzsche took the phrase. It likely was not. There's a lot of mythology in there, but so I'm glossing over a lot. And then it kind of moved about through the 20th century, and it was so deeply embraced by people in esoteric and counterculture communities by the late 20th century, largely, I think, because of Burroughs and Geisen, right? Burroughs and Geisen loved the phrase, and Burroughs apparently once told Genesis Peerage that reality is not all it's cracked up to be, right? Like he was so deeply invested in this idea, and so so then it kind of like moved through, it moved obviously through the Illuminatus trilogy. It was just used constantly, and it was almost like an understood code phrase that very much went along again with this idea of like destroying consensus reality, right? Like that that reality is flimsy, so we can sort of we can make of it what we wish, right? That was more or less the way that it was being interpreted. I'm not necessarily saying that that is what it was intended to mean in every iteration, but that was certainly sort of the broad interpretation of how it was being deployed. And then, by 2007, Assassin's Creed comes out, and like all of the early references, like if, in the early 2000s or in the 90s, any reference to that phrase would have been referencing counterculture and esoteric folk. And then by 2007, of course, it gets used as sort of the tagline for Assassin's Creed, and that changes everything, right? All of a sudden, it becomes like if you do a search today, you will not find references that the only references you will find are for Assassin's Creed, or maybe a few for Hassani Sabah. Is it necessarily, does that mean, was something taken from, the folks that were, the chaos magicians that were into it? No, I mean, like, it was mimetic, right? Like, the information moved online. But it's sort of eerie that is essentially what the internet has become, right? That it was, again, it started to feel like the wallpaper at a certain point, I think. That phrase got used over and over again by a lot of people who were very invested in the internet. And then it became put in a game, and now that phrase is everywhere. And it's also definitional to how we are seeing reality online.
Yeah. And when it comes to video games too, it also makes me a little uneasy because I'm not a video game guy, so I'm not really sure what Assassin's Creed is like. But it makes me think of people that signed up for ICE membership in the past year or two, and we're talking about how it's like Call of Duty, and they're treating it like it's a video game, Like, yeah,
I mean, like Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty are definitely like not, like that's a lot of gamers right now are like, but certainly, I think gaming out this idea of nothing is true, everything is permitted is sort of the existence that we're living, and that is the point.
Right. Yeah. So you're saying the two games are not similar, or are similar?
Not. Very, very different vibe.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying, like, we can see some real world ramifications as far as Call of Duty goes with that one example. That's patently disturbing, right? But yeah. Well, where do you see it all going from here? Do you see a path forward with this?
I mean, you didn't want to end this on a depressing note. Oh my gosh. I'm
trying to avoid that. I'm hoping that you have some.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know. We're all living in our little anxiety boxes now, and hopefully, we will find the will magic to change things, right? To collectively come together and change material reality. Because I do still think that the promise of what people were looking at the dawn of the internet and believing they could do, I think it's still there. It's just, a lot of layers deep.
Yeah. Well, I'll try to be positive on that end too, and back that up, because I think a lot of magic and manifestation is not so much about countering what's happening right now, but envisioning a better future, and seeing how the systems that are designed to keep us apart are really kind of a house of cards that we can knock down if we want to, right?
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, these structures are not set in stone. In fact, they're not made of anything except ones and zeros. So we can absolutely reshape it. It's a matter of figuring out how.
Yeah, I like that, and I want to believe that. So I'm with you.
All right, perfect. So, if Where can people find your book? I mean, I know where they can.
At all places one can find a book.
Okay.
It is available online. I am hesitant to recommend Bezos, so I'll say that if you go to MIT Press's website, all of the different links are there, and you can easily find it from there. The And also I have a Substack.
Right. Yeah, I was going to get to that too. So
Oh,
that's
okay, cool.
your preferred social media for your writings and everything is Substack.
Mhm.
Substack's easily searchable, so I mean, we don't really need to. Your
Yeah.
Shira Chess
It, it,
on
I'm Shira
Substack.
Chess, and my
Yeah.
Substack is at Unseen Internet.
Okay, wonderful. And you got a project you're working on now with Are You Serious?
I
Do you
am.
have any kind of a deadline with that, or an idea where that might be published?
That will likely be out in 2027.
Okay,
It
cool.
is in a good place right now,
Yeah.
is what I'll say. And uh, Ken and I had a lot of fun writing that book, and it is a wild ride of a book.
Well, I look forward to it. It does sound like a fun read. So, um, well, this has all been very fascinating. I will recommend listeners get a copy of this book because I think people will find it every bit as fascinating as I did. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. This was a lot of
All
fun.
right.